Hi everyone. So, the last few days I've been posting updates about the E-M5 Mark III and just kind of sharing my thoughts, and then we've been having that conversation in the comments. And since then, I've gotten some more information about the camera, and also the Nikon Z50's been announced. So I wanted to talk about that as well. And because in the comments, some of the discussion was, I'm going to buy a Nikon Z50, because it's cheaper and it's APS-C, etc. And for me, I would probably still buy an E-M5 Mark II over this Nikon Z50. Never mind the E-M5 Mark III, right? So let's talk about that. And then also, I watched a video by Tony Northrup, which he thinks that the Z50 is a big mistake, and I love their channel. I got nothing bad to say about Tony and Chelsea. Long-time subscriber. I bought their book, but lately I've been disagreeing with him a lot when it comes to these kinds of conversations. Needless to say that Micro Four Thirds is dead was one of them, but that this was a big mistake is another thing where I disagree. And his argument was basically that Nikon shouldn't be wasting any time on APS-C cameras. They should be concentrating on the full frame lenses and lens lineup and the full frame camera features, etc. Why split your R&D and waste money on this? And he also had a great idea, which they're not going to do, but his great idea was, why not make an F-mount mirrorless camera? That would be kind of cool, but they're not going to do that because Nikon's future is the Z-mount. They are ditching the F-mount. No question in my mind. F-mount is dead. If you want to say something's dead, to me, F-mount is dead. And by continuing the Nikon F-mount, like creating an F-mount mirrorless camera, that's when they would probably be splitting their R&D, right? Because they'd have to continue to make lenses, right? Because they're not going to just release a mirrorless F-mount camera and not release new lenses. It's good for us because we have that inventory of lenses usually in our bag anyway, but not for Nikon. They're not going to do it. And so they're not splitting their R&D. They are focusing on the Z mount. Doesn't matter what what sensors in the camera. They are still investing all their R&D into the Z system. That means the processor, the focusing systems, all of the parts and body build. All of that goes into one bucket. Not this is APS-C R&D. This is full frame R&D, right? And and then he said one more thing I have to bring up again, because he said this back when he said Micro Four Thirds was dead, is that the sensor is not the major cost in a camera. It's not what's driving the price, the sensor itself. And R&D aside, to me, I believe the sensor is still the most expensive single item in manufacturing the camera in terms of raw material. When you go from Micro Four Thirds to APS-C to full frame, the cost goes up exponentially because they laser these sensors onto a platter, like a disc. And you can only fit so many full-size frame sensors on one disc versus, APS-C and Micro Four Thirds. And if you get any defects on that disc, and there are defects time to time, I think the rate is 2-3%. I mean, that's, whatever that number is, you're going to lose a lot of sensors on a bad disc if it's a full frame disc. Now, if you have a platter full of Micro Four Thirds and APS-C with the same exact defects in the same exact place on the disc, if it's a physical defect, then you're affecting far fewer sensors in terms of percentages, right? So you might be able to fit 30 full frame sensors on one platter. On the same platter, you can fit like 100 or 150 APS-C size sensors on that same size platter, and then when you go to Micro Four Thirds, an even larger number. And I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it's like a huge difference like that when I researched it back when I was talking about Micro Four Thirds being dead. So sensor cost is still, I think, the single most expensive part in the camera, and that's what's driving the price. And a good modern day example of that is the Canon RP and the Canon M50. When those cameras came out, or when the Canon RP came out shortly after the M50, there's really no difference between those two cameras other than the sensor size. But one costs, right? I mean, there's no more features in the RP than there are in the M50. You know, 4K 30 with crop, no IBIS, etc., right? So yeah, that's a good example where the sensor is really the only difference between those two cameras is one is full frame, one is not, but there's doubling in price. So that's just my logic, and until somebody can prove us wrong one way or the other, I'm going with that. Now let's talk about the EM5 Mark III, because there's been some new information that one of my viewers pointed out to me, because it's on this photorumors.com site. And we can now see the back of the camera, and there's going to be a black version, which is no surprise. And we also have US pricing for $11.99 for the body only. So that kind of tempered my fear a little bit that this is going to be a $1,400 camera. It's now only $1,200, so that makes it a little easier to swallow. Not much, but a little easier, because that's similar to when the M5 Mark II came out, 4 years ago. You put inflation, everything in. That's not a bad deal, relatively speaking. But what really kind of took the wind out of my sails, it's not on this page, but it's on another page, is that it's going to have the same TruePic 8 processor as the EM1 Mark II. Now again, that's rumor, that's not confirmed. I haven't seen anything official in that respect. But if that's the case, that's almost a deal breaker for me, because that tells me we're basically getting the EM1 Mark II in a smaller, lighter body for about $300 less. With a few extra features built in, but we're not going to get 4K 60. We're not going to get 422 10-bit output. And I know those are video things, and a lot of people don't care about video. But on the photography side, the only thing we're going to get new is maybe that handheld steady shot, because they put the new image stabilization mechanism in there, which the EM1 Mark II does not have. It's probably sharing the same mechanism as the EM1X, and that's how they're able to use a TruePic 8 processor and still achieve handheld steady shot. And hopefully it has, better focusing and everything like that. But I think I'll still get it. And I would certainly pick it over the Z50 because of the image stabilization built in, because of all of the, just the ergonomics of the Nikon or Olympus cameras. I think are superior to most cameras. I like the new grip. But if we look at the back of the camera, you'll see that there's no joy there. As somebody in Top Gun said, we got no joy, no joy. There's no joystick. We're still working with the same D-pad and button layout. So that's good for people that are already familiar with Olympus systems, but not so good for people just getting into it. I think they really need to revamp the menu system. And if they're using the same button layout, that tells me most likely the menu system hasn't changed at all. It's probably going to be very similar to the EM10 Mark III. The live view screen looks like it's the same live view screen that we have on our cameras now, with the 1 megapixel standard view, because I can see the same sort of bezels and crop. It doesn't go edge to edge. It looks like it's going to be the exact same live view screen that we have now. So the only real improvement over the EM1 Mark II potentially is the viewfinder itself, because we're going to have an OLED viewfinder, and they say it's a new viewfinder. I don't think it's going to be a higher res than 2.3 megapixel like the previous version, but maybe it'll be a little crisper or have more contrast. It's hard to say what the improvement's going to be. Maybe they put some more new optics in it to make it appear a little bit larger to the naked eye, but it's still a 2.3 megapixel image. Because the TruePic 8 just cannot drive all of those things at once and still give you, fast 120 megahertz refresh rate, etc. It just doesn't have the juice to do that. So those are my thoughts. Are you still interested in Nikon Z50 over the E-M5 Mark III? If the E-M5 Mark III has the same TruePic 8 processor, is there any reason to buy this if you already have an EM1 Mark II? I would say probably not.